Welcome to the Bible Momming Podcast, where we are parenting by the book. I'm your host, Paula Whidden. This podcast is for women who struggle with regular mom stuff, but also long to have their kids grow closer to Christ. It's a lifetime journey, and we're in it together. As a real mom, you just never know where I'll be podcasting from, but I'll always be available for you. Now let's get started. Hey mamas, this is Paula Whidden. I am your mentor mom. I'm an author, pastor, mom of two great girls who are now teenagers, and I have been teaching kids and parents for over 30 years about how to get closer to Christ and live the life of loving Him that He's called us to do. And today we are talking about forgiveness. This is one of those topics that's tough because we always want somebody else to be the one to do the forgiving. We always want somebody else to be the one who gets who does the forgiving. But we're not called to tell other people to forgive. We're called to be forgiving. And this is something that we all have to work on. And it's not something that's like a one and done deal. It's something that we have to work on a regular basis all the time. Now, I don't know about you, but in my family, we get frustrated with each other. We yell at each other. We have our moments where we say things that hurt each other's feelings. And it's something that we have to consciously think about. How can we be real? How can we be forgiving with each other? You see, as a mom, I want to teach my girls to be forgiving people. But in order to do that, there's coaching that comes along with it. I mean, it's not like nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to do this stuff. So I have to figure out how to help them. And I don't know about you, but I grew up with the idea of you just tell somebody, okay, I forgive you. And then you move on. And it was never real, right? I held on to it. I remember my mom trying to get me to do that. And I would say the words to make her happy, but I wouldn't really feel it. So then the challenge becomes, how do we help our kids? And in the process, how do we help ourselves to be genuine in forgiveness? I know that what happens is if we're not, we get bitter. If we're not, we get anxious and stressed and frustrated. And so I'm very aware of what that feels like because that happened to me. My dad died when I was 10. It was in a major car accident where my brother and I were both in the car. And to give you a little bit of background, my parents had not lived together for a while. My parents were in the process of starting divorce proceedings when this car accident happened. And I had to figure out what I thought in the wake of him dying. And so what happened is, here I am, this 10-year-old kid, and I all of a sudden remembered all the bad stuff. I remembered everything that went wrong. And so I was angry at my dad for the longest time. And I held on to that. And it became like clenched fist held up to my chest, like, you owe me and I'm mad at you. And it's very much a kid thing. But as an adult now and much older adult than I'd like to admit, I realize that we all do this. We all cling on to those things that make us bitter, and we almost treasure them. We almost wear them like badges around our neck, like, yeah, I'm tough, I'm strong. And that's not what bitterness does, actually. Bitterness becomes a barrier between us and other people. And I know that because I felt the same way. I struggled with that. I had the challenges of, how do I trust anybody else when my dad wasn't trustworthy? So as you're trying to think about how you handle stress and how you handle the issue of forgiveness, perhaps you have something like that. Perhaps you have a barrier in your life that has been keeping you held back from other relationships, keeping you from growing closer to Christ even, because this bitterness becomes a barrier in every possible way. Now, what we're going to talk about today is some things that I've learned about why we give forgiveness. And it is a hugely important thing. As somebody who's trying to follow the Bible and understand the Bible, when I look at Matthew and Jesus says, this then is how you should pray, it really stood out to me that forgiveness is in the loop, because it says, this then is how you should pray. Our Father who is in heaven, and I'm going to put this in more modern terms, okay? So if you have a traditional Bible with these and thous, I'm not going to do that. But our Father who is in heaven, holy is your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. So in the top three, bam, 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 Jesus says, honor God, he's holy, ask for your daily food, your bread, and seek forgiveness and give forgiveness. So this is huge. I mean, this is a big, big thing. Now, as we do that, I don't know about you, but I get a little temperamental because I don't always want to be forgiving. I kind of want to feel like, no, they should ask for forgiveness, or no, they should seek, to be better people. They haven't done anything differently, right? And I have a right to the way I feel, I'll start thinking. And see, our kids do this too, right? So I'm talking to us about this for ourselves, but as we're trying to teach our kids, the best way to help our kids is to understand how we ourselves respond so that we can help our kids. And I personally tend to think, no, you owe me. Yeah, I'm entitled to feel this way. I'm entitled to have that. You owe me an apology. You owe me, and that's not what Jesus is saying here. He's not saying, do this, then this. He's saying, forgive as you've been forgiven. And so it becomes this kind of reminder of, oh yeah, I've been forgiven. Because you see, Jesus died on the cross and forgave humanity forever for their sins, even before humanity, including me, including you, including everybody that stresses us out and has the forgiveness challenge in our lives. He's saying he forgave before anybody ever asked for it. Jesus forgave us. And so if we know that we have that kind of complete forgiveness, we need to be forgiving. See, when I first accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, I remember one of the best parts about that was realizing that nothing was being held against me, that because of what he did once and for all, I'm forgiven. And all I got, and I have access to God because of that forgiveness. And it was like a huge burden lifted off of my shoulders. And I sit there thinking, so that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to forgive like that. And I didn't want to, but then I found verses like Colossians 3:13 where it says, bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. Yeah, that gets in me and I go, dag, nabbit, really? But yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. And the reality is, if you really look back at it, I mean, it's easier to see with our kids. I mean, when our kids get upset and they fume and they get angry and they just stomp around the house and they cry and they yell and they do all those things that we do internally. And so we get to visually see it. And it's just ugly. It's not a blessing. It's not, don't get me wrong. I love my children, but when they're steaming and fuming for no good reason, it's not a nice thing. I don't want my kids to be like that. I don't want them to live inside that. And so if I don't want that for them, why would I want that for me? It's just the bitterness, the resentment, it doesn't work. It's not a beneficial way of being. I remember as a youth pastor, I played all sorts of games with the kids, and sometimes the games were just plain old-fashioned games. We played baseball and volleyball and, goofy games too. And but then sometimes the games were learning lessons. And I will never forget this one time where there was a game that I found, and I thought, oh, that'll be cool. I wasn't sure if it would fly because it seemed really boring, and yet it did. What happened was I had everybody get into this room. We had our youth group room was this kind of attic above a basketball court. And we're in there, and I had them get into a circle, and everybody got a chair, like a folding chair. And they were supposed to hold it out in front of themselves and then walk in the circle. And if the chair gets too heavy, then you put it down. and then you can get out of the circle. Really that complicated, right? So these kids start doing it. And what happens is, of course, people just kind of, some of them go, never mind, they step out. And some people tried really hard, but eventually their arms started giving and they stepped out. And then, of course, what's left are the three biggest guys in the group. And they're holding their chairs out and they're trying to get each other to wear out faster, and they're walking faster and try to get each other. And I said, wow, you guys are amazing. You're pretty strong. You can hold that really good. Yeah. I said, now, I want you to think about this. What I want you to do is, as you look at that chair, what if I were to tell you that chair is your sin? All of a sudden, all these big guys, they just went, what? And they dropped their chairs and they just stepped back. And I think we do that with unforgiveness. We hold on to it. We keep it close to us. We try to say, I'm tough, I'm strong, I can take this. But it's not actually beneficial. And Jesus is trying to get us to let it go. And when we don't, all we're doing is wearing ourselves out, going in circles. This is bitterness that we hold on to because of unforgiveness. It's something that isn't a blessing. I mean, Jesus never said, blessed are the bitter, for they will inherit the earth. That's not something he said. In Ephesians 4:30 and 32, the Apostle Paul said, and do not bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he's identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on the day of redemption. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. This stuff doesn't harm the other person. We think it does. We think by holding on to it, we're like causing them damage, but it doesn't. So as we're trying to teach our kids, we have to help them to understand this isn't going to make it better. It's not going to change what happened. It's not going to change the problem. It's not going to change the person who hurt you, and it doesn't make you feel better. And just from a practical perspective, it's unhealthy. Johns Hopkins University did research on this. The studies were found about the act of forgiveness, and the idea was that just being forgiving can reap huge rewards for your health. Being a forgiving person can lower your risk of heart attack, improve your cholesterol levels and sleep, reduce your pain, lower your blood pressure, lower your levels of anxiety, reduce depression and stress. It's crazy to think that we would try to hold on to stuff when that stuff is causing us so much trouble, right? Apparently currently 62% of American adults say they need more forgiveness in their personal lives. So my thought is that has to include some of us mamas. And if we need more forgiveness in our lives, then we have to be aware that our kids do too. And our kids are watching how we handle it. We are role models. There's no getting around it. They watch us. They see how we take things in, for better or for worse. And either they want to be just like us or they want to be just not like us. I'm really rooting for the first one, not the second. How about you? So as we're trying to figure this out, I want to encourage you that there are ways to release this kind of forgiveness. There are ways to do it. Here's how we can do it. You got to be honest, and you got to be open about the hurt. Whether that's open just with God, open with yourself. Sometimes you need to be open with the other person, but sometimes you don't. Because your ability to forgive them isn't dependent upon their willingness to apologize or even their knowledge of your forgiveness. Okay? You need to understand that. They don't need to know that you were holding on to it. They don't need to know that you are being forgiving. Sometimes that's offensive, right? The first way to deal with it, though, is to reveal it somehow. Just like when our kids get hurt and they don't want us to fix the wound and they're holding it and they're hiding it, we have to get it out in the open in order to clean it, in order to get it healed. So that's what we have to do with this forgiveness. So we need to take it to God. Start with him. He's the first and safest place to go. Confessing the hurt, if it's really easy to figure that out, bam. But for some of us, we have suppressed hurt. And you might need to ask God, okay, is there any kind of something I'm suppressing, something that I've pushed off to the side that I've thought wouldn't harm me or harm other people, but I think it's actually making me bitter. I think I've gotten to be a harder hearted person because of that. And so we need to be genuine with God and ask for him to open our eyes to that. And one of the things I've learned is that God really doesn't give us more than we can handle. He always provides a way for us to get out. So what will happen is he will reveal some things to you that you need to be aware of, maybe somebody who's hurt you or whatever, but he won't reveal everything. And this has happened to me in the past where I've been going, okay, Lord, who do I need to forgive? Who do I need to forgive? And I'm thinking, okay, I've got it all. I've done it all, right? And then 5 years later, I go through this same process and I realize, no, I didn't. There were other things. And it truly didn't come to my mind. And I think what happens is that we end up suppressing certain things, and God lets us deal with what we can handle dealing with at the time. So with our kids, if there's something big that happens, we don't need to be expecting them to solve the whole problem zippity bippity boo bah. We need to let them take their time, just like God has allowed us to take our time, and come back to it. Okay? And we can help them with that. Now, as we're seeking to understand, then we can decide, I want to release that person from it. And what I mean by this is, so forgiveness, it really has its history in banking terms, like the idea of forgiving a loan. What forgiving a loan means is that the banker would let the person who owes money off the hook by forgiving a loan. They don't owe anymore. For us, what happens is when we're forgiving, we have to decide that that person doesn't owe us anymore. For some people, that's because, they couldn't possibly pay back what was taken anyway, right? If you have been abused, if you have been assaulted, there is no way that person can undo that. As horrible as that sounds, it's true. They can't undo it. So they can't really pay you back. So then realizing what we've been given by Jesus, the forgiveness and the depth of the forgiveness that he gives us, enables us to say, I am not going to hold you accountable anymore. That doesn't mean you want to be best buddies with that person. Forgive and forget is something God does, not something we do. And we are not called to spend quality time with a person who harms us on a regular basis. But we can release the debt. We can decide that that person doesn't need to pay us back. And the way to do that is to be real about it. So that means you could write this down. You could say this out loud in the car if the kids are not around, or if the baby's asleep or whoever. You can do this in a variety of different ways, but think about the person who hurt you and the relationship you have with that person. Put it out there. Don't just let it be inside your head. Say it out loud or write it down, but put it out there. You don't have to say it to anybody. This could be just between you and God. Think about what was said or done that hurt you. And be specific, especially if there are many things. Let the tears flow, because it's okay to feel the pain. Forgiveness often means letting ourselves feel the pain so that the pain doesn't have a hold on us anymore. That I often believe that we as women, we feel our feelings through our eyes. When we're really excited, we laugh hysterically and we cry. When we're really upset, we cry hysterically, and the tears come out. As we think of hurts in our past, letting the tears come out becomes cleansing so that they can not stay inside. They become this visual reminder of getting it out of you. Then think about or write down about or say how you felt about the hurt, right? Did you know that the act of writing this stuff out, of saying it, actually takes away some of the pain, the power of that pain? And you don't have to wait to forgive people. You don't have to hold on to it, go, well, I don't know, when should I forgive them? You could do it now. Get it out of you as soon as possible, right? And then You don't have to wait for them to ask for forgiveness, like I said. You can make the choice independently from them to do it for your sake and not for theirs. Because God has forgiven you, and because bitterness and resentment don't work. And honestly, Jesus has told us, that we are supposed to forgive as we forgive other people. And that's something that takes a bit of realizing. In Mark 11:25, it says, when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. This is something we don't like to talk about. We don't like to think about this, but God is saying that he wants to forgive us, but we need to let go of the things that we are being unforgiving in other people too. It's almost a contingency plan of, when you forgive, we become more receptive and more able to receive the forgiveness God has for us. As you're doing this, you may notice that this stuff, it's not a one and done deal. So with my dad, kind of my own accord as a kid, I wrote him a letter, and I just spewed in that letter. I was just angry about the things he did in our family, choices he made that separated my mom and him, the way that he was cavalier with his choices. And so I just put that all out there. And then I went out in our backyard and I burned it in our barbecue and watched the little embers go up and kind of thought of it like, this is going to him and I'm forgiving him. And I remember thinking, there you go, I've done it, right? And years later, come to realize I had still been holding on to some stuff. And what happens is, we aren't always good at releasing things, boom. And so it takes stages for us to do that. There's a lady that I really respect. Her name is Corrie ten Boom, and she was a Holocaust survivor, not because she was Jewish, but because her family decided they were going to hide people who were Jewish during World War II in their home, and they were caught. And so their family got put in the concentration camps, just like everybody else who was, in fact, Jewish. And so her family went through that. And she was the only member of her family to survive. So she struggled with forgiveness, which is quite understandable. And yet, as a passionate lover of Jesus, she definitely was working on this and definitely was learning how to do this. But one day it was just coming back again, sometimes it sneaks its little head up and comes back again at us. And she went down the street to a church that was nearby her, where a pastor was actually there right then and there. And she asked him, could I talk to you about this? And she told him her issues and how she was trying to deal with forgiveness. That particular church had a church bell. And he says, one of the things about forgiveness is it's kind of like this church bell. When you pull the rope, you ring the bell, right? But if you decide to let go of the rope after you've been ringing the bell still rings. It just rings a little bit less and a little bit less and a little bit less. And what's been going on for you, he was telling her, is that when you don't want to be forgiving, it's like you're pulling the bell and you're ringing it. But when you decide to forgive, you're letting go of the rope. But the bell does still ring. It just gets a little bit less and a little bit less. And I think that's what happens in us, is that it comes back. These issues, they come back, but they are a little bit less. And we can deal with them again, and they are a little bit less the next time. So I just want to encourage you that there are going to be times where these things come back. And this will come back for your kids too. There'll be things that they bring up, their brother or sister or somebody else has done years ago. By the time they're teenagers, you'd be surprised how often they'll bring back other stuff, and you can help them with this. Now, this does not mean that you have to necessarily go and see your offender face to face, but you will know if you've released them when you can think about them and it doesn't hurt anymore. And you'll know when you can pray God's blessing for them on their life. And you'll know when you can focus on the hurt that they feel rather than what they caused, because chances are they were hurt in some way too. Because hurt people hurt people. But the blessing is that healed people also help heal people. So I want to encourage you as you're trying to forgive people in your family. Now, again, they don't have to be there, right? And I mentioned that you could talk it out loud. You could write it down. Like I said, I wrote a letter to my dad, and I wrote very detailed letter, and you could do that. A letter that you never plan on mailing. It's only about you getting it out. Another thing for those people who are more vocal and need to get things out vocally rather than handwritten, because different people are different ways, you could get a chair, an empty chair, and imagine that person is sitting there. And then out loud, share what you would if that person were present, and just tell them how you feel, and then tell them that you're willing to forgive them. And if you've ever done this before, there's an exercise that my pastor's done before that I really appreciate. It can be beneficial if you clench your fingers together and think about the hurt, think about the pain. And then when you decide to say, I want to let that go, I want to release that, then open your hands upright toward the heavens, kind of thing, like you're just releasing upward, and let it go. It becomes not just a mental thing, but a physical action. And see, when we do that, when we say, today I forgive you because God has forgiven me, and I know that resentment and bitterness don't work, and I want to be forgiven, and I want you to be forgiven too. I'm releasing you. You don't owe me anything. When you do that, then you can begin to replace that hurt with God's peace. And so I want to encourage you that God does want to give you peace. He does want to give you that sense of grace that He alone provides. In Romans 14:10-12, it says, you then, why do you judge your brother or sister, or why do you treat them with contempt? For we will all stand before God's judgment seat. As it is written, as surely as I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me, every tongue will acknowledge God. So then each of us will give an account of ourselves to God. God will settle the score. God will balance the books. He knows what's happened here. It doesn't have to be you holding it against somebody else. And I know sometimes we have a hard time giving up that power that we perceive, but let's give it to the one who really has it. God can take care of these things where we feel like, oh, they shouldn't be forgiven. And as a result, we let Him be the ruler of our hearts. Colossians 3:15 says, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace. And be thankful. So I just want to encourage you. If you've had any issues of unforgiveness in your heart with your family, or you've seen this in your kids, you can help your kids to be forgiving. You can teach them to clench their fists and be honest with the issue, and then open their hands and release it. You can teach them that bitterness doesn't work. You can help them to be genuine with their feelings. But the best place to start is with you. When you are practicing this, then you can teach it and be an example of it and coach it in your kids. Now, mamas, if you would like to be part of a Bible study on the topic of forgiveness in the family, I would love to have you join us. Come on over to BibleMomming.com and sign up for the email list so that you can get more information about it. You're also welcome to join our Facebook Bible Momming group, where we talk about this stuff all the time, and we're encouraging each other. And I just hope if you don't have a group that you can connect with, come join us. We would love to have you there. I've enjoyed this time we have together. I know you have plenty of things to do and many options. So thank you for listening. Remember, love is patient, love is kind, and that is never more real than in our families. God bless you and have a great week.